So welcome to today's social system mapping deep dive session for September 20th, 2021. Today, your hosts are me, as usual, and Kara on tech support production, as usual, and Sarah Shanahan, my good buddy from the RAMP network, who is conserving her bandwidth. Oh, there she is. Hey, Sarah. Today we're going to talk about paradigm shifting in networks. So this is our third monthly session in which we talk about some topic deeper related to social system mapping. We have lots of resources for learning more, and Kara will be tossing links to those into the Slack. She'll also follow up with an email within the next 48 hours after this session with more of those links. So if you don't want to grab them right now, don't worry about it. We have recordings of past sessions, a whole big fat library of them, which Kara will share with you also. And if you ever want to just have someone to talk with about social system mapping, I'm available on Thursdays from 4 to 4:30 Central Time. I do cancel sometimes, so look in Slack for that. Okay, today's agenda. We're going to do chat check-ins and introductions. Sarah's going to frame our topic. We're going to do some breakouts. I'm going to frame some up in Miro, and then we're going to do some breakouts. And then we'll come back to discussion. And I didn't put the second breakouts in the agenda because I wasn't paying proper attention to the agenda, and it didn't have that spelled out clearly. And then if you will also do that optional half hour if you want to stick around after that. So let's start with chat with our intros. And in the chat, go ahead and put your name, pronoun, and location. If you would, if you're willing. See you, Brian. Are you? Sure.
I'm in now.
Okay. Yay. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yep. Waiting for names, pronouns, locations. And Margarita, would you like to do a quick mic check?
Hello. Thank you.
Hello. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. And is that Sonia or Christy at Local Concepts?
Hi there.
Hi. Welcome.
Good to see you.
Which of you is it?
Sorry, I didn't realize I hadn't updated that. It's Sonia.
Okay. Welcome, Sonia. Good to see you. Okay. And then let's have you put in the chat. Let me stop sharing. A primary network that you're working with or are part of. One of your sort of home network places and what that network is about. We'd love to hear that. Susan and Chris, do you want to do a quick mic check? Just say hi. Don't have to. Totally optional. I want to give you that chance. And Liris, want to do a mic check?
Yes. Hi, how are you?
Hi, welcome. Good.
Thank you.
So we're just, in case you just joined and don't know, we're putting our name, pronoun, and location in the chat, and then also primary network that you're working with or are part of. And once you've done that, the last question I have for the chat is, what do you think of when you hear the word paradigm? Whether it's good, bad, you can't stand it, it's confusing, it's the most important thing in the universe. What comes to you when you hear the word paradigm? We're seeing some cross love, network love, cross networks going on in the chat. That's great. It's that network of networks that people like to talk about and hold in their minds. So paradigms, worldviews and frameworks, and define, yep, the sort of how we see things, patterns, fundamental patterns. tough to shift and see beyond? Absolutely. Paradigms, if we're not aware that there are such things as paradigms that are forming our thinking, it's pretty hard to get out of them. So evolving the way we think, and they can shift if we know we have them, and if we examine them, and if we choose how we would like them to go to, or they could be shifted just by differences, overall cultural differences, unintentionally too. I think we've had huge paradigm shifts in the last 20 years. Okay, so while you're finishing that up, I am going to introduce Sarah Shanahan. Sarah is, Sarah is a community manager at the REAP Network, which is one of the most mature and well-studied networks in the United States. And so Sarah has lots of experience with network failure and network success and all kinds of stuff about networks. And Sarah and I have been working on a network map of hers for, I think, over 3 years, or maybe even 4 years now. It's a long time. And we have presented social system maps in a lot of contexts to a lot of audiences. And one of the things that Sarah will often say when she's presenting a social system map is how in her tenure as the community manager at REAMP, she's the person who orients new members. And so she would, meet with a new member and sort of walk them through what the network is and how they can engage with it and what it means to them. And she said this many times in many contexts to people when we're displaying social system maps, that without a social system map, her observation was that most members of the network took like 3 years for it to really sink in, for them to really begin to understand what the network is and how to really access and engage with the network fully. And once you had a social system map, that process sped way up to 6 months or a year. It just got much faster. And so I was thinking about that recently, and I was thinking, what is the difference? Like, why is it she could say all the same words and have all the same things available in the network, and people could take 3 years for that to sink in, whereas if she showed it to them visually, it could sink in much faster. And I realized that, well, there's a paradigm that they have coming in that needs to shift, and seeing something visually helps speed that up. And so that's kind of like was the question for me to Sarah for this session was, what's changing? Like, what changes? What do you think is going on in there in the minds? That's what patterns are shifting? What's the map going from and going to? So that was, yes, and Sarah knows a lot about what not to do. That's what experience is, right? It's great. Okay, so having said that, I'm just going to go back and I'm not going to share my screen. I'm just going to hand it over to Sarah to set us up for thinking about paradigm shifting.
Yeah, and Christine, before that happens, actually, did you want to check in to see who felt really comfortable using Miro?
Yes, thank you. So Sarah also keeps me on track because I tend to get off track really easily. So if you could, everyone who's just raise your hand either physically or with the Miro thing, or with the Slack thing, if you're comfortable enough in Miro that you can take some notes from a conversation. So there's Brian, there's Jim, Stephen, Melissa, I should be writing these down. There is, I'm afraid I might be saying that wrong. I apologize. If you want to correct me, please do.
You got it very good. It's just like ladies instead of
Ladies.
ladies, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Melissa. Anybody else? Okay. Oh, Margarita.
So yeah.
Okay, great. We have plenty. So what we're going to do in a minute. So Kara, when we, after Sarah talks, we're going to go into breakout rooms. with someone who's comfortable in Miro in each room. And so the breakout rooms are going to be set up, and then the Miro board is going to be set up with your names on it. So that's why we asked. And I'll hand it over to Sarah.
Well, yeah, hello, everybody. As Christine said, I'm Sarah Shanahan, Director of Community Management for the REAMP Network. And I've been with REAMP for 13 years. So Christine's right, like I definitely have a lot of context growing up in a network. It was my first professional job. And it's been a really interesting learning experience for me being part of REAMP, being part of a generative, what we describe as a generative social impact network, you know, really working into complexity, right? And I think that's where this paradigm shift conversation is something that we're just becoming a lot more aware of, because just like the work that we're trying to accomplish, which is to equitably eliminate greenhouse gas emissions, right? Climate change is this really wicked, complex problem. You know, actually caring and managing and understanding a network is just as complex, right? You know, it's really made up of human beings who as individuals are complex, and now we're putting them in relationship to one another, you know, and it really just makes everything extremely messy. And I've been in the role of Director of Community Management since 2017. So, and we started mapping in about 2018. And I know I was giving out some love in the chat to local concepts, but I definitely want to throw a lot of love to Christine and Tim over at Greater Than the Sum, because, you know, what we're doing, how we're starting to understand the network, this would not be possible without them. My colleague and I had actually tried to use Kumu to do some mapping, and after 2 days of trying to use Kumu and wiping away all of our tears, we were like, this is not for us. Like, this just doesn't work. And that led us to find sumApp, which was this super sweet tool that helps you collect and manage data in a way that we could not otherwise. And just having that work with Kumu, we would not be where we are today without them. So I just want to throw some love out there. I know we were all in the chat throwing out our own definitions of what a paradigm shift means, but just for a little context and grounding here, you know, I just did like, what is the Google definition, right? If we were going to look it up in the dictionary. And a paradigm shift is a fundamental change in approach or underlying assumptions. And as Christine was saying, you know, we have definitely noticed some fundamental shifts, some paradigm shifts in our network from our members as a result of the mapping. So as Christine said, you know, we really put a high value on orientation. Since I have been community manager in 2017 and even preceding that, you know, we have felt and we have observed with our own eyes that having an orientation early on and having a good orientation does lead you to being more active and more participatory in the network. But back around, like, it was about 2014 or so, if folks are familiar with Pete Plastrick, you know, he's a well-known author. He wrote Connecting to Change the World. It does feature REAMP, where he talks a lot about networks. We had him in to do an evaluation. And as Christine had mentioned, what we have found in that evaluation was that it took 2 years on average for people to understand the network, because it's this complex, you know, ball of people and relationships and, you know, places where you can plug in and get connected and participate and whatnot. But those things are also always changing because we're always evolving, trying to reflect what we learn, the changes in the world around us. So yeah, it takes people 2 years to understand the network. Holy shit, that is not okay. That's a long time for people to really kind of understand who we are. So, and I can say that during my orientations, you know, I would often, as Christine said, you know, I'm talking about the network, I'm boiling it down to be simple, right? Like, here's what you could get out of the network, you know, here's the ways that you could plug in. You know, I'm always kind of listening in to try to find those sweet spots between what they're working on and what I know about the network so I can facilitate that engagement. But oftentimes during that orientation, towards the end, I would ask people, hey, so, you know, you've heard a little bit more about us, you know, you have a better understanding of what the opportunities are. You know, is there any way that I can help you engage in the network? And people would go, well, I'm not sure yet, but you know what? When I think of something, I'll come talk to you. And I'm sure you can imagine where that led to. You know, maybe once in a blue moon, I get an email from somebody who said, hey, by the way, I actually do want to connect. But I'm actually going to show you this picture here, because what I started doing is after we had a map built of the network, you know, I started using to show it during an orientation. Still, like, after I'd had a chance to, you know, share about who we are and what we do and, you what ways people could engage. As we're coming to the close of the orientation, I'm sharing with them this map, right? And what this map shows is it shows circles, which are people, and relationships between them. And as I started doing this, I noticed a significant shift in people's perception and understanding of the network. I'm not kidding you. It seems so simple, but when people started seeing this map and started seeing what we could do, like being able to filter and zoom in and find folks based on different criteria, it was like a light bulb went off for them. And it was like, oh, that's what REAMP is. It's actually just a bunch of human beings. You know what? Now that I'm seeing like these human beings, I'm actually thinking about this other work that I'm doing, and I'm wondering if other folks on the network are doing it. So people actually started to lean in and be a lot more curious and to think a lot more concretely about the network. Folks would ask me during an orientation, oh, actually, Sarah, now that I'm seeing this map, I want to know who else might be working on utility scale solar. Do you think we could find those folks? Absolutely. That's why we have all these filters. We can focus in by their issue area, we can focus in by community served, and we can look together to see who you know, who you don't know, and then I'm going to help get you connected. And we've seen this over and over and over again in the orientation, at least, where it really just it's a paradigm shift for people. Like they just understand the network differently by simply seeing it. And for me, on one hand, that was surprising, and on the other, it wasn't, because we've actually seen, we've worked with some communications experts who have said that, humans are visual first and verbal second. So, that's actually in line with this paradigm shift that we've seen, right? When I talked about the network, people were kind of like, okay, sure. But when they saw the network, it was like, oh, now I get it. So that's one way that we've seen a big paradigm shift in our network. I think another shift that we've seen that kind of changed the way that we as a whole, as a network, has behaved is through a showcase view of our map here. So in a showcase view, this might be really hard to see because I'm zoomed out so much, but there are some little gray dots and lines here in the background. But what I have displayed here is just folks working on decarbonizing the power sector. So in the previous view, we were kind of zooming in, removing the noise based on what we were looking for. Here, we're popping out that characteristic and seeing it within the whole. So when we looked at this as a network, we actually showed this at an annual meeting. This actually was not very surprising to us. We have a long history of working on decarbonizing the power sector, and our map reflects that, right? There's a lot of circles, so there's a lot of people working on it. There's a lot of lines, so there's a lot of relationships built around it. And there's a lot of people centrally located in the network too. So for us, it was kind of like, okay, cool. Doing a good job on that, not surprising. But when we looked at transportation, we saw a big difference. So first we're going to look at just electrifying transportation. But comparing this to decarbonizing the power sector, you can definitely notice a difference, right? There are less people, there are less connections, although it does look like kind of for the most part, we're kind of centrally located here still too. So that was a little bit interesting. But when we looked at a different dimension of transportation and we looked at changing transportation options, which our analysis has told us is a really key pathway to equitably eliminating greenhouse gas emissions. Electrifying transportation is important, especially for bringing down those emissions, but it's not necessarily the most equitable pathway because of some of the financial barriers that lie there. And in fact, changing transportation options is really how we help those who may not have the access to capital to do things like buy an electric car or things like that. So when we saw this changing transportation options, it was like, oh, holy shit. We have far fewer people working on this, far fewer connections, and far fewer folks centrally located. Now, again, we've always had this like deep sense in our belly that we needed to do more on transportation, right? We've seen transportation's 30% of the emissions. We know that we do a lot of driving here in the Midwest. And we do some work on it. But after we showed this map, it really lit a fire in the belly, especially of our steering committee, the folks who are responsible for setting the strategic direction of the network. And it really caused them to act. They said, you know what? Transportation has to be one of our 6 priorities, and specifically looking at how we make it easier for people to get around without having to drive. We launched a transportation hub after that. We got involved in Transit Equity Day. And all of this, again, it wasn't that we didn't know that transportation was important before this, but seeing it on the map caused that paradigm shift, right? It caused us to think differently because we saw it, and it caused us to act differently. So it was actually, like I said, like this was really, really important for us because like I said before, I just really feel like that seeing is believing as we talk about paradigm shifts in networks. So that's a little bit about, kind of where we were at. And we kind of want to dig in with you a little bit more about just, what paradigm shifts you have seen or that you could imagine seeing in your network if you had a map, right? If you had a social systems map. But before we do that, we are going to put you in breakouts for that. But before we do that, I'm going to turn it back to Christine because she's going to give us a quick little tutorial of Miro, which is the tool that we're going to use to do some crowdsourcing of information here.
Okay, can you guys see my screen? Okay, so the reason we asked for some people who feel comfortable and proficient in Miro is because we don't want to, we're not going to go through a whole big tutorial about how to do everything, but I just want to make sure that some people have enough grounding that they can help each other out in the small groups. I just grabbed 4 of the names of people who said they were proficient because there are 11 of us and we want to have at least 3 people in a small group. So we didn't go past that, but just what we're going to do is, and I want to, one thing that I have noticed that it took me a long time to figure this out. And so I thought I'd just share this one little piece with people, which is, you may not know, but most of us we'll make a Post-it by clicking on the Post-it, picking the color, putting it over here, and then typing in it. You may not know that you can do this, but you can just hit the tab key, and then you can make another Post-it, and then to hit tab and make another Post-it. So in fact, that makes it way quicker and easier than clicking, dragging, typing, dragging, typing. It just is very quick. So I just wanted to point that out for anybody who's not familiar with that. And what we're going to have you do is we're going to break you up into groups named, your breakout rooms will be named after the person that's proficient in Miro. And then we'll just have you go into, there's a different board for each group, different colored little frame. You'll want to zoom into that frame. You'll want to just have a conversation then about the paradigm shifts, and just somebody, either you each can do it yourselves, or if one of you, just make sure that you are capturing in some way the basics of what we're talking about, what's coming up for you. And then while you're doing that, I'm going to be in here and I will do this occasionally, and I will copy. So if you see me, doing something like grouping, or if you see me messing with your Post-its in your group, don't be alarmed. I'm just going to copy them and then I'm going to put them down here in this frame, and then start clustering them. So I'll be clustering while you are keeping track, and then we'll all sort of wrap up the clustering together and take it to the next step. Any questions about the process? Okay. And I don't know how many people we have now, because now that I'm going to just stop sharing my screen for a moment. Looks like we're still at 11 people. So
I have one group of 2.
Yes,
I know. Okay.
So there will be one group of 2. And so we were wondering if we should maybe narrow the groups down to just 3 groups, so that some of them have 4 and some of them have 3. What do you, all people for that?
I
Okay.
think that makes sense.
Okay. So
Yeah,
then
I think that makes sense.
who wants to opt out of being a room host of Melissa, Margarita, Lidis, and Jim? Okay, Jim and Melissa both want to opt out, so I'll take Jim off. I'm going to take him out. Oh, that means I'm leaving the list. No, I'll make the, what, Melissa, what do you want me to do? Leave you in?
Okay.
Leave. It doesn't matter, because you can both work on it.
Yeah.
It's fine. No worries.
Okay. Kara, you have decided what rooms to do. You can, so is everybody ready then for the breakout game? Oh, you'll have 10 minutes.
Yep, and yep, I was going to say, well, it'll be a little less than 10 minutes. We're going to bring you back at 10:35, okay? So just know that we'll give you a warning too before that happens. The questions in the chat, and try to use a yellow sticky. It doesn't matter what shade if you can. And like Christine said, she's going to be doing some copying and pasting, so don't be alarmed, but enjoy your breakout and your conversations. Looking forward to seeing what you all have to say.
Great. Okay. Welcome back, everybody. I have been copying the Post-its. I have not started to cluster them yet. And so I'm going to just invite whomever is also, I'm going to just encourage you to stay in your Miro board, but shift your focus down to the big lavender rectangle below. And help me if you can cluster these into categories. And we have a sort of a wide.
Yeah, so you can just grab, right? You can just grab those stickies and move them around as you see appropriate. Is that what you're inviting folks to do, Christine?
Yes, the orange, the yellow and gold stickies in the lower lavender rectangle. I'm just sticking them together kind of closest so I can read them, but feel free to start dragging them into clusters if you can see clusters. And I'm going to do the same.
And maybe while that's happening, I'd be curious to hear from whoever wrote on the sticky about the map that you produced for the 300 participants. To maybe just share a little bit more about like what that shift, like what was the status and what was that shift afterwards? It sounds like there was a lot of energy, but maybe you'd be willing to just share a little bit more about like what you shifted to and from.
Yeah, that was me. That's Liberating Structures Global Gathering. And people knew each other from all over the world. There was like 5,000 people in a Slack group. So people knew each other in spots. But when the global gathering came together, you know, people were going to connect with each other for 3 days, which there was a lot of energy around that. But when I created the map, within 2-3 weeks, the entire map, 300 people populated it, and people created affinities just through the map itself.
Wow.
So it was a visual directory more than anything else, I think. So there wasn't any deep shift, but I think it was the first time people could really see themselves as a global community prior to actually getting together as a global community.
Yeah, that's interesting, Jim. So would you say that there was like a shift maybe in the ability to self-organize as a result of the map?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
You know, another thing that came up in our group was that sometimes the activities themselves of pulling together create the same kind of thing in the short term that a map does on the long term, where you start to see yourself in community on a map, you see yourself in community in an activity. So it's possible that somebody could have created an online event for 5,000 people and had 300 or 400 people show up, and that you might have started to have gotten a little bit of the same feel of seeing yourself. But there's nothing like the map for the persistence of it, being able to go back over and over and say, who are those people? So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I see another card here that's pretty interesting too. It's they say knowing where perspectives comes from reveals the many different paradigms, which it is itself a shift. I want to invite whoever wrote that card maybe to say a little bit more about what you're seeing.
That was me, Sarah, Melissa. Working within a network of activists and change makers working on different issues in across 6 continents, what we noticed was how many people's motivations were often very similar, but their perspectives were often very different. And I think just understanding the many different paradigms within which people already exist, and also then understanding with great humility the dominant paradigm that I certainly embody coming from the United Kingdom, and understanding the intent behind the network, which is to be power and privilege aware and decolonizing in its intent. Just really being aware of those perspectives all having validity And I think that there's a terrible temptation in our expert knowledge economies to give too much credence to expertise and not enough to lived experience. And that's what I mean by that, if that makes any sense at all.
Well, I think what I was hearing right here is like there's a big shift, it sounds like, in the understanding of intent of the other people in that network. Does that seem true?
Of intent, but also of their perspective of there are so many people, for example, living with the great unraveling that we're experiencing a micro bit of in the United Kingdom, but there are people who've been living with it for for years and years and years. And I think it's just a real understanding that my paradigm, although dominant, is certainly not universal. I think that's incredibly healthy, the plurality of perspective. And the thing I often feel is that scale itself is the enemy of diversity. And so that's what I love about some of these networks that you visualize.
Can you, Melissa, there was a way you said that understanding different perspectives. Is that something like that? I'm sorry, I'm like doing several sort of mental things at the same time, and I had a moment of like, oh, that's a name of a cluster. I'll just put that down.
I never remember what I say, Christine, so don't ask me.
Yeah, me
I
neither.
wrote it down, Christine. I said understanding a shift in the understanding of the intent and perspectives of other people.
I'm making that a cluster name, not a Post-it. Say it again.
A shift in the understanding of the intent and the perspectives of other people.
Okay, so I'm going to confess that I'm feeling a little undercapable of doing this clustering, and so and we have a limited amount of time. So I'm thinking, Sarah, how about if we like bail on the clustering? People, if anyone wants to continue clustering, that would be wonderful, and feel free to sort of drag some of these around and cluster. But to just put you back in your small groups for a little while, and just to see if anything from seeing other people's comments and just from this brief bit of conversing we were able to do, if you're starting to see, to be able to like name the shifts, name like what's the the from and the to, what is actually the mental model changing from and to, or just what's coming up for you right now, what's giving you energy or curiosity at the moment. So does that sound okay, Sarah?
Yeah.
Do that?
Yes, that sounds good. I put the question out in the chat. Maybe this time to help us differentiate, like use a shade of blue sticky.
Yep.
But yeah, what's standing out to you in terms of how mapping can support these shifts? As Christine said, I think it's helpful to name like the to and the from.
And then, so let's give them about just should we say 5 minutes for that, and then we come back and have everybody share. Yeah, Kara, can you?
5 minutes, same groups.
Okay, same groups, 5 minutes. See you in a bit. And and blue Post-its back in your rectangles, please. Yep. Thanks. Okay, is everybody back? Looks like it. Thank you. So Sarah, I can't remember where we're.
Yeah. No, I'll take it over. I'll do a little bit of driving right now.
Hey.
So if you're still looking at the Miro board, you're going to want to look down where Christine was putting some of these stickies. Maybe the yellow was on the left. If you kind of scroll over to the right a little bit more, you'll see some of these blue ones. But I did see an interesting cluster emerging here from, somewhere around like from alone to community, individual to network, organizational to systems. It seems like what's an emerging theme here at least is that there is some big shift here, paradigm shift, in terms of the scale, right? Whether you're thinking about that organization to individual to thinking about something greater. There was a couple other ones in here too that I'd invite folks to maybe jump in and share a little bit more about. The shift around like my experience isn't universal. How much of this can come out of a conversation? I don't know, whoever wrote that sticky, if you want to say a little bit more about what you were sharing there, the shift that you're seeing.
Yeah, it was just that.
Him again.
Yeah, it was just that. You know, we come out of our own world experiences, and by using the map to connect with people that have other stories is powerful. And whether you can see that data on the map, because the prompts on the map are stories that they write in long form, or whether it's self-organizing groups in which those stories can then come out, where you're convening groups because you see the affinities on the map. And then I think Margarita also said, you know, just by having a lot of different attributes, you can start seeing different groups of people where you're going, oh my God, there are really people that have a different, coming from a different place. I don't know if that captures it, Margarita.
I feel
Anybody
like
else who has? Oh, go ahead, Margarita.
after Melissa's points before we broke into breakout rooms, that was a quote from Melissa that my paradigm isn't universal, like that realization, oh my God, like maybe that's why it diminished, like it takes less time for people to acclimate to your networks once you show it to them too. Maybe that's part of it.
Yeah. Anyone else want to maybe share something that came from your conversation or that you're seeing on the board? Somebody who hasn't spoken yet. Go ahead, Stephen. I see your hands up. Go ahead.
Yeah, it was interesting when we started to talk about like having a paradigm from which your knowledge is being communicated or pulled together. And then if you've got a map and you've got on the map different groups which maybe have different paradigms, how does that, so you see different groups, are they mapped as having different paradigms? And where is there a difference between like a different perspective within a paradigm, you know, an extension of a paradigm, and then the need to go into a new paradigm? Like when you know, there's, because you can have like bridges between paradigms where it's kind of like, so a community organization may bridge between a funder. They may have some paradigm understanding of funding and some paradigm understanding of community, but the funder might be quite isolated from the community, and the community might be quite isolated from the funder because their paradigms are too different. So I just think that's interesting, because I don't know how often network maps necessarily show, you have to kind of work out what the paradigms are from that.
And just in a social system map, we try to get those things as well. So that's, yeah. So it's more complex than a network map, where we're calling that out. Yeah. Yeah, that's useful.
That's an interesting idea, right? Like your paradigm, right? The way that your assumptions, right? Your underlying assumptions and views of the world, how those could, like, you could be focused on the same issue, right? But maybe a funder is seeing it different than that community organizer, and that's how they end up missing each other, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, when we continue to try to force like ourselves to fit into those same paradigms, right? When I'm chasing the funder's money instead of just like living my own paradigm, like that's why I think where we see some systems start to fall apart, right? Because we aren't doing things differently. We're all trying to shoehorn into the same pathway, same paradigm. Mm-hmm. And maybe there's some underlying assumptions there that just weren't true.
And is that not why we have to be power and privilege aware? You know, because funders are powerful. And you know, when the tail starts to wag the dog, it's one of the challenges, isn't it?
Yeah.
So Mary just popped off, I think. So I'm going to stop us here because it's at the top of the hour. This was really wonderful, and thank you all for showing up. And for those of you who are new to our norms, the formal program goes to the top of the hour, and then we'll start. In just a minute, we're going to give each other our blessings for the day. And if you want to stick around for the extra half hour, just don't pop off, and then we'll have an open-ended conversation and just go whatever direction whoever wants to do it. So we'll all unmute. I'm going to count down 3, 2, 1, and then we'll just all say, you know, give each other greetings for the day, and then we'll hang up. 3, 2, 1. Thank you all. Love you.
Have a
Have a
good
wonderful
day.
Blessed day.
day.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Macht's es gut.